without further ado, I invite Mr. Patrick Bruce, Director of Oval Partnerships, to come and talk about his observations.
Thank you, King, and good afternoon, everybody. If I stumble through my words a little bit, I do apologize. I'm fresh off the plane from France late last night, and this little document here was actually prepared this very morning. I will race through it as quickly as I can. There are a couple of points I want to make right at the beginning. When KP approached me originally, we were talking about a theme called designing time, which I thought was very clever, because there are several interpretations that you can make on designing time. I rather took the view that we are probably talking about, into this coming era, how we are going to be actually designing time. Or are we? That's the big question for me. The big question into the future is, will we be defined by, will we be designed by time itself? And that's something we all need to, I think about into the future. This new era of AI is running at the speed of light, and I'm not sure that we'll be able to catch up with it. Enough of that. The principal question really was, there were 3 points. What were the demands and requirements from industry for ST graduates historically over time? What trends and transformations in industries happened? What were the most important criteria for industries to consider for ST graduates? And then the third one, in what ways can we best prepare for this? Hence my big question at the beginning, that last point. How can we prepare for these major changes coming into the future? So, context of time. Slightly historic perspective from my point of view. I thought that might help us have a clear view of how we've evolved over time. Oh, and incidentally, that document which Yanta was referring to and which KP was referring to is an excellent document. I received mine this morning. And I will actually repeat Yanta's statement here, it's completely made this piece of paper redundant. So I'm kind of winging it at the moment. It's unfortunate. Had we seen this before, this would have saved us an enormous amount of time digging out the information. Digging out the history of School of Design is not easy, I have to say, from my own experience of it. This is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. If you haven't read it, please do. It's very, very informative. Okay, so when did I start getting involved with PolyU? And how? Well, the how, it was really serendipity. It was just being in the right place at the right time. I was working for a company quite well known at the time called Conran Design Group in the UK. This was around 1986. And by the time 1988 came along, I'd been packed off to Hong Kong to open up a Conran Design Group company here with Chris Law, both of us working in London at the same time. Chris, born and bred in Hong Kong, of course, some of you will know him. And that started pretty much, you would say, a lifelong marriage. In a design sense, we are still business partners to this day in our company now, and it doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon. So when we arrived, it actually created a very big noise. Yanta, you will remember the consternation, the uproar in the industry, which at the time, as a design profession, I think was feeling fairly fragile. It was an industry populated by relatively small companies. And the big fear was that this big elephant, Conran Design, was going to come in and eat everybody's lunch, the lot. That we would come in force, and we would destroy the market for everybody else. Those were completely unfounded fears. As it happened, we never grew beyond 24 people in the 4 years that we were operating the company here. But what it did do was put me into contact immediately with PolyU. And that was back in the days of David Meredith. He, I think at the time, correct me if I'm wrong, Yanta, but I think at the time he was very much involved with the Chartered Society of Designers, as was I back in the UK. And that naturally formed that kind of forum in which we could start to talk. So during my long stay here, I think there were kind of two major themes that occurred to me. One was actually to do with what's in that document, and that was the succession of very able, very capable, highly intelligent leaders of the School of Design, from that early stage for me all the way through to today. The second is actually part of the questions that KP asked me in the beginning, and that was the demands of industry on our students and the changes in those demands over time. And it seemed to me when I looked at those two issues that what I needed to be looking for is where these things are working in lockstep together. And it is actually quite interesting when you start comparing, and again, unfortunately, it's already in there. It's a pain. How dare you write this without telling me? Oh, I'm shocked. It is a very interesting thing to look at when you see both the development of the academic curriculum over time related to the development of technology over time, and in turn related to the development of industry over time. And every few years you can see an absolute alignment between all three of those things. So I think what we've managed to achieve in the School of Design is absolutely, truly remarkable. We've managed to use this momentum to keep us going forward. So, the era of David Meredith was an interesting one. I describe it as an era of transition. It was an era, and I quote actually from that document now, where our graduates were actually feeling very frustrated. They were frustrated by the fact that design as a tool was not being used in any strategic way whatsoever. Design as a tool was there to serve the business of OEM manufacturing. OEM manufacturing heavily influenced by conceptual design being exported from somewhere else into Hong Kong. And frankly, what are we left with as designers? We were left with the kind of crumbs on the table, trying to productionize these ideas, trying to actually get these products out into the market. And as a fully qualified designer, having gone through the hands of people like David Meredith, all the way through, this panoply of superb leadership that we've been blessed with over that 36 years. For the designers coming out into industry at that stage, it was a very, very frustrating experience, very difficult for them to handle. So that was, a period of transition. The next step was when Hazel Clark arrived. And one of the key points was the way in which she pushed very hard for government support and government recognition of design as an important industry. Now, I didn't realize until I looked through that document this morning that it was Hazel that actually started that discussion and that big push into government on the academic side. So again, a really, really important time at that point, which I described as a time of consolidation and reflection. What are we as a profession? Where are we as a profession in this big thing called Hong Kong and the wider context of that in East Asia? And how do we capitalize on that? And her point was, without government help, without government recognition, we're not likely to get there. So the next one in was John Fraser. I never had the pleasure of meeting John, but he had a huge impact when he arrived. Those of you who were here at the time will have been aware of the shock that he sent through the system when he landed. It was almost as if he was an alien, and he came in with this vast agenda, which did one really important thing, which turned out to be very, very prescient for us out there in industry, and that was this mass relegation of all traditional skills that we'd been learning through all of our lives, getting rid of all of that and replacing it with the advent of the PC. And we all looked at this and said, what's a PC? How does it work? What is it going to do and where is it going to take us? And we had no clue. And we were all running companies out there in industry, relying on the old traditional skills, the manual skills, the conceptualization skills, the rendering skills, the model making skills. You all know all this stuff, right? And suddenly we were looking at all of this possibly becoming redundant. The other thing that we were looking at is, are we going to be able to work with the graduates of PolyU anymore? Because they're not learning the stuff that we think we need. Well, boy, we got that wrong. This man was very forward thinking, and he got it right. The easiest example of that was how, very shortly after his tenure here, how AutoCAD became the standard across the entire architectural industry, the interior design industry, and I think it was being used to some degree in product development as well. That was absolutely astonishing. It was the quickest transition of anything that I've ever seen in our industry. Within a matter of about 3 or 4 years, there wasn't an office in Hong Kong that wasn't using AutoCAD. And to this day, it still remains a staple. So, very forward thinking, John Fraser, confused us all completely. I think probably confused an awful lot of our alumni as well, completely. Certainly those who were students at the time. But really fundamentally forward-looking, and has actually had the biggest transformative impact on the practice of design outside. Actually leaving an awful lot of space for the future development, which happened, of the academic space. What is it that designers should do? How do we engage with the public out there? How do we engage with clients and client potentials? What can we offer them now? Because we don't need all those traditional skills anymore. So that was actually quite fundamental, and I think it's given a huge boost to raising our academic standards across the board, generation after generation, all the way through. So John Fraser, the supreme disruptor I described him as, He was the one person that demanded we needed 10 times more designers in Hong Kong if we're ever going to compete on the international stage. 10 times more? Where are we going to put them all? You know, that was the thinking at the time. But frankly, he was right. In manufacturing industry was disappearing. Even in the property development area, we were already becoming a very, very, very mature, well-developed city. And the opportunities in property development, in this case, affecting interior, environmental design people, and of course the architectural profession, was already being felt. There was not a lot to be done in Hong Kong. So what were we going to do? Well, his disruption, I think, was timely. And I actually have to take my hat off to him. I think we're enjoying the fruits of his very advanced thinking at the time, even now. One thing I wasn't actually aware of was his very advanced look at machine learning, and all of these things that are kind of with us now today, that come through to fruition. I mean, he was with us from 96 to 2002. So that's 20 years ago. 20 years on, all of this stuff is coming to fruition, and it's very real. It's hitting us very hard. Now, frankly, no discussion on industry support for PolyU, for any of the design professions for that matter, it can be complete without mentioning Victor Loh. I would describe him as the design professions, one of the design professions' greatest friends. He has been absolutely astonishingly energetic in promoting everything to do with design and across the board. At one point, I thought it was going to be with his educational background himself. I think it was MIT, right? Chicago, yeah. That with his industrial background, that he would focus on that kind of more engineering thing. Well, as of today, this same gentleman is heavily involved in the promotion of the fashion design industry. And I went, okay, all right. I mean, he has got a stretch of imagination in the design disciplines, which I think is second to none, really quite extraordinary. And he's been behind the integration of both design in academia, application of design in industry, and the integration of design across many fields for so many years now. We should never ignore the impact of that. He was the greatest promoter from industry that we as an academic institution, I think, have ever had. I hope there will be more coming in behind him. So he, together with, at the time it was Professor Leung Tim Pui, who were basically pushing Hong Kong along the road from OEM to ODM to OBM and beyond. And now, with the three of you sitting in front of me right now, seeing this all the way through into design evolving away from product, from physical things, and starting to look at social issues, starting to look at political issues, starting to look at systems design that are going to help us all the way through. I could go on. I'm not going to eulogize too much because we can talk to you in person afterwards anyway. But Lorraine, roughly 2004, I think, the first I think, the first Swire professor of design, if I'm correct, and fundamentally helping to establish design as a managed discipline. The whole question of design management was given a very big push by you. And the other big push that came from you, apart from all the academic achievements, as a designer in the field, elevating the status of Hong Kong onto the international platform. That was absolutely fundamental, again, to where we are now. And again, a good example of how things work in lockstep. Whilst you were doing that, we, on the outside, including Victor Low, Eric Yim, sitting right over here next to us, current chairman of Hong Kong Design Centre, we were pushing Hong Kong Design Centre to try and help lift the status of design across Hong Kong into the international arena. And as we know, this is all part and parcel, bound up with BODW now, running over the next few weeks, which has become one of the preeminent design expositions, debating arenas, sharing platforms internationally. One of the biggest such operations in the world. Latest breakthroughs, of course, through, I think actually thanks to COVID, breaking through into live online streaming, which means that we're now reaching audiences of millions of people around the world from Hong Kong, not just the few thousands that we used to have or the few hundreds that we used to have previously. And so we go forward. Case de Bon, who drove the status much further and pushed us into the application of design thinking into all kinds of things like the social design and social responsibility of design. So each step, each one of you has lifted up higher onto this international platform. Cutting it kind of short now, I have to say I got to the point this morning where I thought I have to come to a conclusion. And I actually wrote a little kind of heading here that said conclusion. And then I thought, hang on a minute, is it? Or is it actually a beginning? And I think it's the latter. Because I think we've now reached this next paradigm in design called AI. And honestly, you can argue that AI has been around for a long time. It has. But the exponential growth of AI, of chip technology that has just gone vertical has only happened really essentially in 2024. And it's gone crazy. And along with it, a debate has started to develop. And we need to be part of that debate. I would argue that within the Hong Kong context, we need to be leading that debate. We've been warned by one of the most mercurial people on the face of the planet. I'm not quite sure whether you can ever trust what he says, and I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I'm talking about his new buddy, Elon Musk. Elon Musk is one of the early warning symbols, really, of the potential of AI. He warned us that AI needs to be controlled. If we are not on top of it, it will be on top of us. And coming from him, I think we can probably assume that he's had a few ideas about this himself. I'm not quite sure that they will all be benevolent, but I'm sure he's had a few ideas, so he knows what's coming. So basically, I think we need to take a little lesson from history. because AI is such an abstract concept for so many of us, and it's so new, it's so novel. It's developing at a speed which is beyond anything that happened before, beyond all of the other computerized systems that we had before. And we need to understand how we are going to interact with it without even understanding really what it is. So my last point, just taking a little lesson from history. If we go back to some of the early 20th century movements in design, you can talk about De Stijl in Holland, you can talk about the Bauhaus movement, you can even go back further into the arts and crafts movement. Those have tended to become, in the public eye, I think, slightly diluted. They've become almost like style statements. They weren't. They were philosophies. They were design thinkers philosophically trying to resolve what design should be, what part it should play in the world, and how it should manifest itself. I actually think that we're at that point now with AI. What we need is not necessarily just being able to adapt to and adopt the coming unknown world for us as designers. We need to be having that philosophical debate to determine how we're going to relate to these things. Are we heading into a kind of R2-D2 world? You know, are we going to have little electronic helpers, robots running around, slightly depressed robots, you know, but running around with brains the size of a planet, helping us in a benevolent way? Or are we moving towards a kind of a cyborg a reality? And it is a reality. The use of electronic chips to deal with disorders of the brain are already here. There are people out there who have had wonderful therapies to help them through terrible brain disorders. So it is possible that, you know, we could actually be looking at a nasty little cyborg thing coming along at the end of this new development. We need to be there. PolyU is here. PolyU needs to be right front and center of that debate. That's our future. If we don't debate that future, we don't have one. Thank you.
Cheers.